stranded within one of the harshest environments on Earth sits a portal to an age long lost. Not a literal portal, mind you. This isn't Stargate, at least that I know of, but it might as well be for how otherworldly this ancient site seems by today's standards. As the video title and thumbnail so rudely spoiled, you already know I'm talking about Nabta Playa. But why? Why is a YouTube channel that largely focuses on gaming and culture taking a random detour through history? Because it's interesting, that's why. And interesting is what this new series is all about. Now stop interrupting me with questions I'm merely imagining you saying, for it's time to go on an adventure. An adventure that will take us thousands of years into the past. But given the cyclical nature of time, what is past is future, and what is future is past. And as you'll so very see, the story on Nabta Playa contains parallels to our current times. For the past decade, Nabta Playa has lived rent-free within my noggin. I have a weird personal attachment to it because following my time in the army, which left me with a serious case of PTSD, I had a phase of my life where I not only kept entirely to myself, but I was heavily reliant upon escapism. And one way I achieved a separation from reality was with research. I would spend hours upon hours upon hours just locked away in my room taking extensive notes on any subject that caught my eye. And one of these subjects was Egypt, more specifically, pre-dynastic Egypt. It was while lost within a historical rabbit hole that I first learned in Nabta Playa, and for reasons you'll soon learn, it rightfully stole my attention. Although, for as fascinating as it is, it's oddly not a topic that is given much air. There's very few YouTube videos about it, and history books merely give it a lone sentence or two, or just ignore it entirely. Yet in today's world, which consists of a changing climate, and with the fear pushed by rabid social media netizens that humanity will be displaced and killed by these changes, I think the history of Nabta Playa stands as a prime example of not just the normalcy of the situation we find ourselves in, but also the strength of the human race when it comes to adapting and overcoming. I know that's a lot to take in considering the context you're still lacking, so let me cut out the personal baggage and we'll jump right into it. Nabta Playa resides within the Sahara. Its location is roughly 500 miles south of Cairo, and here the land is harsh and the heat unforgiving. As a Minnesota girl, the mere thought of its average temperature makes me ironically shiver. But while the area is now hot and oh so very dry, it hasn't always been that way. It was around 14,000 years ago that the entire region was fairly humid, and during this moment in time the desert was covered in greenery and bluery. By this I mean it contained lakes. This era of wetness is known as the African humid period, key word being period because it was only ever destined to last so long, given the drastic changes the entire region is known for. For instance, thousands of years before the humid period, during the previous glacial maximum, it was, like today, a desert. Meanwhile, North America, Asia, and Northern Europe were covered in tremendous ice sheets. The accumulation of ice drastically reduced sea level, and it was as much as 130 meters lower than today, which is a ridiculously massive drop in height, but an important one within the history of humanity as it allowed our ancestors to traverse the globe, on foot no less. I'll do my best to avoid going on too many tangents during today's video, but as it pertains to the massive drop in sea level, I enjoy thinking about it because within myth, Atlantis is the lost city under the sea. But could it be real? No, of course not. It's a silly thought. Unbelievable. Unreal. But only by the standards upon which we typically view the story. I mean, think about it. Thousands of years ago, a significant portion of the sea floor as we know it was very much exposed. So how many people, metaphorically, lived under the sea? How many dwellings and monoliths were forever lost once the ice melted and the ocean basins filled back up to the brim? Sure, it wouldn't have been advanced cities. Life isn't a Disney movie, and I'm not arguing aliens and fancy tech. No, just small settlements and such. Sites which if found today would serve as archaeological gold mines. Ones which would fill in vital gaps of the human experience. But now we've moved back into fantasy because the actual sea would have long ago destroyed nearly everything, leaving little to no remnants behind. returning back to the deserts of Egypt. Following the lengthy ice age, rainy seasons migrated further northwards, and with rain came lakes, and with lakes came highly sought-after areas for humans to congregate. At least, temporarily, because the Saharan lakes were only ever seasonal. They were a summer phenomenon, and to nomadic people, it was a blessing of life. This was all long before agriculture was the norm, and with how difficult it would have been scavenging for food and drink within the harsh environment, temporary lakes became reliable places to find nourishment. They were also great for raising cattle. If you've ever wondered why cows are incredibly sacred to people from around the globe, it's because of our long history with the animal. 10,000 years ago, it wasn't cattle as we know it, but a barely domesticated ancestor called an auroch. And they were perhaps one of the most important resources for roaming nomads, as they were essentially walking cupboards of food and drink. Close your eyes and put yourself for a moment within their shoes, or sandals, or whatever. You're struggling to survive in a difficult land, and game is already scarce due to the typical dryness and heat. Yet here in your possession is a somewhat tameable living beast made up of milk, meat, and blood. 3 things which can keep you alive. Under such circumstances, you might come to view it as a gift from God, which is basically what happened. It's not an understatement to state that without cattle, the entire region wouldn't have been occupied as it was. Cows were the lifeblood to many people, and for that reason, they became deified. And that's why early religions had cults dedicated to the creatures. And as you'll learn soon enough, it's why Nabta Playa contained some of the relics that it did. But what is Nabta Playa, you're probably still asking, given I've so rudely avoided explaining it up to this point? Well, the short and narrow is that it was a gathering place for nomads, and with its predictable weather became a place of regional and religious importance. It also contains the oldest known astronomical site in the world, predating Stonehenge by over 1,000 years. This is actually pretty rad as it shows the sheer ingenuity of our species. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself, so let's slow down and quickly go over its rediscovery in 1973. A handful of decades ago, the archaeological world found itself in a bit of a frenzy. Egypt was prepping dam projects that would ultimately flood historically important locations, which kicked off an archaeological effort to find and save as much as possible. One of the experts within the region during this time was Fred Wendorf, but he had aspirations of finding lost ties from before the Pharaonic era, and so he eventually split off from the efforts along the Nile to make an even bigger name for himself. It's here that I find myself at a bit of a fork in the road, because there's 2 different versions of what happened next. According to Wendorf, a guide whom he had previous history with told him of some megaliths within the Sahara, and upon traveling to the area he was able to confirm their existence. But the tale differs should you ask Romuald Schild. He was along for the ride with Wendorf, and he claims the megaliths were discovered during a bathroom break within the desert. Personally, I don't much care what the true story of its rediscovery is, because that's not what's intriguing to me. What's intriguing is what was found at the site. Although before continuing, I should quickly note that archaeology is not a speedy process. So please keep in the back of your mind the knowledge that the findings I'm about to go over were uncovered over the course of many years. It began in the 1970s, but it certainly didn't end there. Anyways, following its rediscovery, Nabta Playa, as it came to be known, was picked over and studied, and today it functions as a unique window into the past. 9,500 years ago, as the Playa and its name suggests, the location was a temporary lake which existed every year for 4 months. The summer rains would come, it would fill, stuff would grow, and thus it became an area of sustenance. It remained that way for a few thousand years, and over that course of time it became a yearly location for nomads to congregate. Relics left behind depict a culture which is relatively far more advanced than those living closer to the Nile. It also provides insight into the early formation of the Hathor Occult. Hathor is the solar deity of ancient Egypt and the mother of Horus. She very often takes on the shape of a cow. As I previously mentioned, cows were a major source of nourishment and key to the survival of many ancient peoples. And due to the nourishment they provided, it made sense within myth that they take on a motherly form. Thor and Hathor's ties to the sun, another source of nourishment, growth, and survival, and you can quickly see how the symbolism runs far, wide, and deep. As it pertains to Nabta Playa, scattered about the place are the remnants of sacrificed cows, with one elaborate tumuli containing an entire calf. This suggests great effort and care went into ceremonializing their deaths, and given what we know about early religions, the sacrifices probably served as a gift to the gods, with the intended purpose of receiving more rain or food or something equally vital in return. There is also a rock carving depicting a bovine, which further suggests the formation of the early cult. With how vital the creature was to the nomads, it's understandable why they came to view it as sacred. Outside of that, other remnants found at the site include, but are not limited to, dugout water wells, homes and hearths laid out in an organized manner, and the oldest known remains of sorghum. This is a cereal crop that even today is insanely vital to many economies and food supplies, and its usage at Nabta Playa paints a picture of a grouping of people who are slowly but surely evolving away from the fully nomadic life. Compared to what we know about their local contemporaries, they were ahead of the curve where the first agricultural revolution was concerned. And lending further weight to this line of thinking is that grass seed, legumes, tubers, and fruits were also found stored within the area. Other evidence suggests that at the start of each rainy season they'd plant various crops along the lakeshore, and what helped them keep track of the seasonal weather is a perfect example of human ingenuity and the contents for which Nabta Playa is most well known for. Laid out throughout Nabta Playa are stone megaliths, as well as a much smaller stone calendar, and these literal rocks function as a fairly accurate seasonal clock, which is fucking badass. These roaming bands of nomads were so familiar with the stars, which makes sense when you think about it, they were able to devise ingenious ways of tracking the movements of the great beyond. By aligning stone with the lights above, most notably that of our sun and those of Orion's belt, they were able to mark the precession of the equinox, keep track of the rising and setting sun, its zenith its zenith passage, and they tracked the summer and winter solstices. Their early astronomy was vital to their survival too, as it told them when to plant crops and when to pack up their cattle and leave, because should they have overstayed their welcome, they surely would have died given the lake completely dried out for 8 months of the year. The main reason stone calendars and megaliths work so well at tracking the seasons is because of the reliable order of the universe. The sun, moon, and stars largely behave as expected, and there's a noticeable consistency to it that couldn't escape the notice of our more primitive ancestors. And consistency was important to the nomads. Their lives were dictated by the natural order of things, and knowing when to move on to one location or stay in another was a level of knowledge that kept entire groups, and their cattle, alive. It further helped that the weather typically behaved as expected. At least, until it didn't. Because around 6200 BCE, there was a global temperature decrease that once again caused North Africa to become drier. This wasn't an instant be-all end-all event, as various parts of the region remained hospitable for centuries to come, but it was the beginning of a trend that altered the fate of our entire species. Roughly 2,000 years after the globe began seeing an overall decrease in temperature, there was yet another drastic change, and it's here that the Sahara stopped seeing green and it became the wasteland we know today. This change in climate is called the 5.9 kiloyear event, and what happened is that the rain belts began moving south towards Ethiopia, and where Nabta Playa is concerned, the lake permanently ran dry. The consistency the nomads had known for thousands of years just up and vanished, and with the Sahara drying out, humans from all over North Africa were forced to relocate to the only sources of water they still knew. So in what became one of the largest mass migrations of humanity up until that point, people flooded to riverbanks, the main ones being the Nile and Euphrates. With former nomads forced into long-term settlement and now packed in closer than ever, a new form of society was created, and the dawn of civilization as we know it was set into motion. As if the 5.9 kiloyear event wasn't endlessly fascinating just based on the effect it had on humanity, making it further stand out is what caused it. Something called Orbital Forcing earns much of the blame, and explaining it is a bit of a doozy, but I'll try to make this quick and simple as possible. Just please bear with me. As hopefully you all are aware, the Earth orbits the Sun. Duh. But what many might not realize or remember is that the Earth's orbit is not a perfect circle due to the gravitational influences of other large planetary bodies. Due to this constant pulling, our orbit fluctuates from being near circular to being slightly elliptical. When following an elliptical orbit, it's called eccentricity, and in these instances, the seasons become uneven in length because of a change in how solar radiation bombards our home world. Further screwing with things is that the Earth's tilt also goes through a cycle of change. Roughly every 41,000 years, the tilt moves from 24.5 degrees to 22.1 and back again. And depending on what phase of eccentricity our orbit is in, the heat from the sun only continues to land on us differently. As if that wasn't enough space fuckery, there's one more term you need to know, and it's precession. Long story short, this is the wobble of the Earth's rotational axis caused by tidal forces. What you need to know now is that precession influences the seasons by changing whether the north or south poles are at maximum or minimum possible distance from the sun. For example, when the northern hemisphere is tilted at its maximum distance, we see milder winters. I'm not going to dive too deep into the scientific nitty-gritty, as detailing all of that at length could rightfully be its own video, but what you need to take away from this is that eccentricity, tilt, and precession all play a role in all our climate functions, because each one of those aspects alters how much solar radiation we receive and where it hits the hardest. They're also all cyclical. As previously mentioned, the tilt runs on a 41,000 year cycle. As for eccentricity, that's roughly 100,000 years, and precession is around 20,000, give or take. Further making this a mess is that the sun's solar radiation isn't a set constant, as we have solar minimums and solar maximums. I detail all of this not just to explain how the 5.9 kiloyear event was caused by a perfect storm of all those factors, but also to put into perspective how entwined humanity's fate is to things far outside our control. These days, whether man-made or not, there's no denying the reality that we are experiencing a shift in climate behavior. I personally believe its causation is a natural phenomenon which is being spectacularly exacerbated by our output of greenhouse gases. But regardless of what's prompting it, I'm not of the mindset that the end is nigh. As an intelligent species, we have time and time again proven ourselves to be highly adaptive. Way back when, the people of the Sahara experienced a complete disruption to everything they knew, yet humanity still persevered. Even more than that, their hardships paved the way for civilization as we know it. The mass migrations of North Africans towards river valleys is directly linked to the 5.9 kiloyear event, and had that occurred even 1,000 or 2 years later, everything would be different. Consider that, a complete upheaval of the climate caused by a natural cycle within the solar system gave way to the technology-driven society we have today. That is a powerful thought. It's also representative of the power of the human race. Our entire history is rife with us adapting to difficulties, and with the technology and science we currently possess, the imaginative side of my brain loves to get lost in thought about future possibilities. If a previous upheaval gave us civilization, what might the next one do? Could it be what pushes us further towards colonizing space? A galactic civilization, if you will? Who knows? Only time will tell, and I'll be long dead before an answer is revealed, but it remains invigorating nonetheless. Although, I understand why many others would disagree. As a modern society who's accustomed and comfortable with staying in one place, the notion that we could be displaced in a matter of decades or centuries is scary. It's uncomfortable, but migration is normal. Cities and towns and residences were never meant to last forever. The many archaeological wonders of the world depict this well enough. Do you think the people who spent decades building ancient megaliths and monuments ever considered the possibility that those locations would become completely inhospitable? No, of course not. Like us, they thought they were there to stay. But the mere notion of such a thought runs counter to reality. We are beings on a planet that runs on its own cycles. Cycles of ice ages and drought and extreme weather. And even when things are momentarily calm, the larger universe can still wreak havoc. Just ask the dinosaurs. That, to me, is the importance of Nabta Playa and why it means so much. It is an ever-present reality check which keeps my brain grounded. These days, the media loves to fearmonger about the horrible fate that could befall us, and no doubt we will see hardship. This is to be expected no matter what. That is history in a nutshell. But hardship is opportunistic, and the future we're looking at is one in which human ingenuity will be forced to take center stage once again. At the top of the video I said, what is past is future and what is future is past. And I meant that. Everything we see now has happened before. The best we can do is learn from it, and in that regard, I think the story of Nabta Playa is emblematic of oh so very much. It's not only a tale of perseverance through upheaval, or a reflection of our own animal intelligence. It's a reminder of how normal change is to the human experience. And that should bring everyone a sense of calm. Thanks for watching.